Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. CFL Week 4 is upon us. Ian Cameron with you, the solo show this week, and we are ready to talk CFL Week 4. Before we get into the 4 games this week, we will begin, and I think I forgot to do this last week. We did this last year when one team was on a bye week. We did spend some time talking about that team because we wouldn't be obviously mentioning them or bringing them up or discussing them during the game previews because they're not playing. And, of course, the team on a bye week this week in the CFL is the Calgary Stampeders, who have gotten off to a mildly surprising start, I guess you could say, 2-1 to begin the season. They started with victories against Hamilton and Toronto before dropping their first game of the season last week to the Ottawa Red Blacks in what was a monsoon, heavy rain, heavy wind, not conditions ideal for playing football. But look, there's been a lot of positives for Dave Dickinson's team in the early going. When you look at them on the offensive side of the football, when you go from Jake Mayer to Vernon Adams Jr. at quarterback, you're clearly going to be a lot better on paper. There's no way you can't be. And we have seen that certainly through the first 3 games. There's competence, once again, at the quarterback position for the Calgary Stampeders. That has certainly made a big difference. This team has got a ton of new faces on defense, Calgary, entering the season, and I still need to see more before I'm ready to give an accurate assessment of what they have on that side of the football. I think they've definitely played better than I expected because of 75% roster turnover on that defensive side of the ball. That's a lot. And in those circumstances and situations, usually I don't expect a strong start out of the gate, but there's no doubt this Calgary defense has some potential, and they've played better, I think you can say, than I anticipated. You know, it was late in the first game against Hamilton when finally the Ticats offense got going, but they were stymied early in that game against the Calgary D. I thought in the Toronto game until late in the game when finally Nick Arbuckle started to get into a little bit of rhythm, Calgary's defense did a pretty good job against the Argos in their second win. Last week against Ottawa, you do get concerned that the Ottawa Red Blacks in that game last week, their first loss of the season, Ottawa was able to have success with the running the ball and an Ottawa team that certainly in those conditions, they were going to commit to running the ball, and there were some issues that the Ottawa Red Blacks had or the Calgary Stampeders had as far as containing the run in that loss to Ottawa. So maybe that run defense is still a little bit of a vulnerability for them moving forward. We'll have to wait and see on that. But overall, I would not have been running to the assumption that Calgary would be 2-1 after their first 3 games. So they're in a decent spot. Now, they are in a very competitive West Division, but there's been a lot of things that, again, for this Calgary team that you like what you've seen in a lot of circumstances. They've upgraded at quarterback. The defense hasn't been that real liability and vulnerability that maybe I thought they would. Now, they do have to overcome Bagleton's injury, and that does hurt the receiving core, and they do take a hit as far as that's concerned. But the good news is they've had some other guys step up in that receiving. Clark Barnes, who's been here for a long time. There's still some options and some good targets for Vernon Adams Jr., but Bagleton's injury certainly is a big loss. There's no denying that whatsoever. But like I said, it's just Dominique Rhymes certainly is going to get more and more comfortable as time goes on. They have Tevin Jones. They have Jalen Philpott, Tyson's brother, who, I think is going to eventually be a pretty good player in this league. Like I said, I still need to see that defense a little bit more. One of those games was against Arbuckle and the Argos, a backup quarterback. One of those games was against Dustin Crum, again, a backup quarterback, and we're not sure he's a very good backup quarterback. And they did struggle with their run defense. Adeboboye and Stanback, combined for almost 200 rushing yards in the one loss for Calgary. So the run and the defense still, in general, I'm not ready to say they're great yet. They've certainly exceeded my early season expectations, but I'm not ready to say they're great yet. It's just, let's take a deep breath and let's calm down about, calling Calgary a really good team or a good or a great team yet. Schedule is certainly going to get harder for them moving forward. They're going to have 2 with Winnipeg, and they're basically going to be playing their next 3 games, 2 with Winnipeg and 1 against Saskatchewan. And that game against the Riders is on the road. They're basically going to be playing 3 straight weeks against teams that are undefeated as of right now. So we're going to find out a lot more about just what this Calgary Stampeders is all about. This Calgary Stampeders team, I should say, is all about coming out of the bye week. All right, let's get into Week 4 action, and we will begin with the Edmonton Elks and Winnipeg Blue Bombers here on Thursday night to kick off Week 4. Winnipeg 10.5-point home favorites, 51.5 the total in this game. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, their demise has been greatly exaggerated, that old saying, and I guess you could say that here for Winnipeg. And 2-0 to begin the year, straight up in ATS. And remember, this is a Winnipeg team that did not get out of the gate strong last year. In fact, it was a very rough month of June. And even into July, the struggles carried over last year for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But there's no doubt they have had a better start to the season this year. And they've shown they can win games in a variety of different ways. They can win a game where the offense explodes, 34 points in beating BC in the first game at home. And then last week, there were times where the offense stalled with Zach Collaros. And, of course, the first game was Chris Strevler at quarterback. Probably the best game, it was the best game I've seen out of him, especially throwing the football in his CFL career. But Zach Collaros came back last week, got off to a strong start early in the game. The Winnipeg offense did bog down, though. Throughout that game, it stalled a bit, and you got to give BC defense credit for that as well. But certainly there was a time where the offense kind of sputtered. You know, one of their touchdowns in the second quarter was a defensive touchdown on the interception return actually it was a fumble recovery for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers there that gave them a touchdown last week in that game. And it was just one of those deals where it was an unfortunate turn of events for BC, and that's really where the game started to get away from them when you look at it last week in that game, because you certainly saw that they were hanging around early, but that defensive touchdown really, really did hurt for the BC Lions. And, Winnipeg's defense stepped up. They took advantage, obviously, of facing Jeremiah Masoli instead of Nathan Rourke, and it was a very strong defensive effort in that game for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And, yeah, they took advantage of it, but, no, there's still a quality defense. I think what's been a bit surprising is that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the first 2 games of the season, if you really look at the team numbers here, they've given up some passing yards in both games. They gave up 281 through the air to Masoli last week, even though they won. And coming into the season, I did say the Winnipeg secondary, there are a lot of new faces back there. DeMario Houston was a big part of that secondary. He's no longer there. Tyrell Ford was a big part of that secondary. He's no longer there. He's actually with the team they're playing here in this game, the Edmonton Elks. So there was some turnover back there, and certainly there was an ability for Masoli to throw the ball and move the ball through the air, but unfortunately mistakes, turnovers, bad red zone execution, and Winnipeg defensively, when BC was moving the ball, they either forced a turnover or they ended up coming up with the stop in the red zone last week that propelled them to victory in that game. They still have only played one team, and that's BC, 2 games against the same team. So now we're going to see how they fare against, obviously, a different team, different offense. And what are we going to get from Trey Ford here? What we have seen from Trey Ford hasn't been pretty so far, if we're being honest. He struggled against the BC Lions, really outside of the one Houdini play that he made, which he's capable of making these, and it looks just incredible when he pulls it off, where he's under pressure, he evades the rush, he scrambles around, buys time, throws off balance down the field, is able to find a wide open receiver on a broken play. He's been able to do that multiple times, but there are a lot of red flags still with Trey Ford's game as far as stationary, standing in the pocket accuracy, snap to snap, throw to throw. It's not where it needs to be. It's that simple. His stationary, standing in the pocket accuracy, there's a lot of room for improvement there. His decision-making has to get better. He still has too many mistakes that he makes. That's concerning as well. The offensive line's a work in progress, and probably even more of a greater work in progress with the David Beard injury for the Edmonton Elks, as he's on the 6-game injured list now, and that's a loss on the O-line. So the good news is Ford's mobile, and he can scramble out of the rush, and he probably will see a decent dose of Willie Jefferson and company tonight. And it's a good thing he's athletic. It's a good thing he's mobile. But again, his accuracy and decision making does need to improve. See if they can get the run game going here a little bit as well, because certainly they have had their issues committing to. Well, they've also been trailing in these games, so it's hard to get the run game and commit to it and get it going when you're down and trailing like they were in each of their first two losses against BC and Montreal. So that's something they're going to work on. As far as Winnipeg goes, Nick Dembski's a game-time decision, but, they've still got a pretty good receiving core for Collaros when you're looking at a healthy Dalton Schoen, Stearns, Carrick Wheatfall's impressed me. Clercius has also got some talent, too, at that. So they've got enough weapons still, obviously, for Collaros. Matthew Peterson, it's pretty amazing that the run game really hasn't skipped a beat, crazy as it is to say. Without Brady Oliveira, who's been ruled out once again. I mean, he's had 172 rushing yards, 5.1 yards per carry for Matthew Peterson. I mean, over 5 yards per carry tells you that we need to start, as Brady Oliveira is great, but we need to give credit to the Blue Bombers O-line. They've been able to run block at a high level and open up those holes for Matthew Peterson. And even with Brady Oliveira out, Matthew Peterson's come in and run the ball well. And we know with this Edmonton Elks team, run defense has not exactly been great for them over the years. And really the whole defense is a work in progress. They're still giving up too many explosives, too many big plays in the passing game. There's zero pass rush to speak of for Edmonton. They have one sack. One sack in their two games against Montreal and BC combined. One sack. That's just not good enough. In this league, you have to affect the quarterback. And the Edmonton Elks defense is just not doing that right now. So it's difficult for me to envision a scenario where they're going to hold Zach Collaros in check in the passing game. And that secondary's sprung a bunch of holes. Another interesting dynamic, and that tells you the state of this Edmonton defense right now at this point in time is, they're cutting guys that they thought were going to be brought in here and make a big time impact for this team. And one of those guys was Emmanuel Rugamba to shore up this secondary. He plays 2 games. They think they're getting a great player. He plays 2 games, and he was not good. And I'm being kind when I say that. And all of a sudden, he was released after the loss to the Montreal Alouettes last week. So here we go again, where you think you're improving the personnel on the defense, and the guys you are brought in to improve the defense, they're not performing. And Rugamba and a lot of them in that secondary, and even the linebacking core struggled. Serezna, I like, even you could say he's been quiet because he's supposed to be one of the guys that is supposed to contribute to the sack count for this team, and they have 1 sack in the first 2 games combined. So it's the whole defense is just, again, underachieved, not played with the improvement that we thought. And until I see improvement, how do you not think this team is going to give up another 30 burger, another 30 spot, just like they did against Montreal, just like they did against BC? You look at head-to-head. Winnipeg's had no issue scoring points against this Edmonton defense. Going back to July of 2023, Winnipeg's point totals head-to-head versus the Edmonton Elks, 28, 38, 45, 27, 55. They've had no issues moving the football against this team. I don't know if it's going to change tonight. Certainly, I don't have faith in it based on what I've seen from the Edmonton defense so far. So I think Winnipeg gets their points. I think Edmonton can score a bit too, though, because as much as Winnipeg's defense, 14 points allowed to BC in the first game, or last week, I should say, and then 20 in the first game against BC. BC does have O-line issues. BC also didn't have Rourke last week. And the one thing about Ford is they're an aggressive defensive front, Winnipeg. And that's sometimes the defenses where Trey Ford can be a little bit more successful and effective. The teams that really try to rush and blitz and have that pass rush, well, he can beat that if he escapes. And that's when he becomes dangerous. So that dynamic, I think, could actually work out well for Edmonton in this particular matchup. Use a very aggressive front defensively that Winnipeg has, maybe against them in certain situations. So I bet this game over. It's the only bet I made on this game as far as side or total. I got it at 50. It's gone up since then. 51.5 is the current number. But I think we'll see Winnipeg score a bunch. I think Edmonton could contribute to this over. I'm very, very much tempted to take a small piece of Edmonton's team total over 20.5 as well. It's below the key number. And I'll say this about Edmonton. They scored 28 last week, even though they lost against a very good Montreal defense, although a lot of it was in garbage time. And maybe that's another thing, too. If maybe they're going to fall behind and Winnipeg's going to, start strong, and the Elks are going to start slow like usual, and they get behind early. Well, it doesn't mean they can't get to their team total. They're the kings of scoring in garbage time when the game's out of hand. So Trey Ford's shown that already. So the team total is of interest to me, 20.5. It's going to be a small bet maybe if I bet it, but I think below the key number of 21, I could see the Elks maybe getting to that 21-point mark. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to cover, because I think they're going to give up 30s here to Winnipeg in this game. But I do think we can get over this total. I think there's going to be some points scored here with the Elks and the Blue Bombers to kick off week 4. All right, Friday night football tonight. Montreal and Hamilton. Crazy line movement here where Montreal opened pick'em -1, went all the way up to 3.5. Even some 4s were starting to appear with Montreal. Now it's all the way back down to 1, 1.5, 2 with Montreal as a road favorite here, depending on which book you're looking at. 48.5 the total. And the reason for the movement back down, well, it was Davis Alexander being ruled out for the Montreal Alouettes. He will not play. It's not a big surprise to me that he's not playing in this game. He hadn't practiced all week. Remember, he got injured last week, and they kept him out for precautionary reasons against Edmonton. They had the big lead. They wanted to make sure they played it safe with Davis Alexander's health. They put MBT in there, and they finished out the game. But the fact that, after the game, Davis Alexander said it wasn't a big injury, minor injury, precautionary, made you think he was going to be able to play this week, but that's not the case. So it will be McLeod, Bethel, Thompson, and it's not just DA that's out. Davis Alexander for Montreal. There's no Austin Mack at receiver. Dylan Wynn, starter on the D-line, is not going to play here for the Alouettes either. So they are missing some personnel and some key personnel here. But the Austin Mack wide receiver absence, it's not because he is a great player. They do miss him. But the reason it's not a needle mover for me is because there's such a deep, loaded receiving core. I mean, even without Austin Mack, you still got Cole Speaker. You've still got Tyler Snead, who's played very well early in the year. Charleston Rambo, Tyson Philpott. I mean, you've got just a ton of weapons still at receiver for McLeod, Bethel, Thompson in this game. So they're deep at that position. It's not the be-all, end-all when they're down one receiver this year because of how much depth the Alouettes have at that spot. So, yeah, they'll miss him, but I don't think it's a backbreaker by any stretch of the imagination. Montreal looks like the best team in the East. I've said that already. Now, they've looked like the best team in the East with Davis Alexander at quarterback. Can they look that way with McLeod, Bethel, Thompson at quarterback? And all McLeod, Bethel, Thompson has to do here is no turnovers, don't screw it up, take what the defense gives you, run the football, rely on that run game too. And Montreal is going, running back by committee this year. Sean Thomas Erlington, Stevie Scott, Travis Tice. Rely on that run game and rely on what's been a great defense as well. Montreal's defense, they've been a ball hawking group. They've forced turnovers in bunches every single week in the first 3 victories they had. Rely on that defense. They've got a kicker that's been excellent as well. I think he's one of the best kickers, at least so far this season in the CFL. The Fresh Maker, if you know the old Mentos commercials, the Fresh Maker, that's what I call him. Jose Maltos for Montreal, the Fresh Maker. And it's a great nickname for him, not only because Maltos and Mentos, it sounds like the same thing, but he's fresh on the scene. He's only been in the CFL a couple of years. He's got a fresh leg, and he makes kicks. The Fresh Maker. I mean, it's a perfect nickname for him. Plays off the old 1990s Mentos commercials. And, his last name's got the same number of letters as Mentos. Mentos Maltos, it sounds the same. It's a perfect nickname for him. The Fresh Maker. So the Fresh Maker, Jose Maltos, has been excellent making these kicks. Very little weaknesses in this Montreal team. Very complete team. And they are a team that I would be willing to trust, even without their starting quarterback, because of just the sum of the parts, the completeness of this football team in all three phases, to still be able to go into Hamilton and quite likely win this game. It's hard for me to have faith in the Ticats. Now, Montreal was in this very same situation last week. They were facing an inferior team on the road, and that home team was coming off a bye week. And it didn't matter. Montreal was just the better team, flat out, start to finish. Now, there is no Davis Alexander here. That's the main difference. But again, here's Montreal. They're the better team, roster-wise. To me, there's no doubt about that. Hamilton off a bye week, looking to bounce back after, a loss, just like Edmonton. Last week, it didn't matter, though. Bye week be damned. Montreal went in there and won. And I think that could happen here. I think you're getting a discount, quite honestly, on Montreal here, even with MBT. Now, I will admit, I bet Montreal early in the week. I was thinking still there's a good chance we would see Davis Alexander. We're not. That does hurt. And it hurts because, look, McLeod Bethel Thompson can be effective, but the throws on the run and the ad-lib plays when the pocket collapses, those decline significantly with McLeod Bethel Thompson at quarterback compared to Davis Alexander. Throwing on the run, MBT can't do that accurately like Davis Alexander can. He needs a stationary pocket. If you give him time, though, to throw the football, McLeod Bethel Thompson can be very good here throwing the football for Montreal. And the Hamilton pass rush is hit or miss. Let's put it that way. Now, for Hamilton, you look at their two games that they played. They lost to Calgary. They lost to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan game, to me, was not a great game from Bo Mitchell by any stretch of the imagination. I thought they bogged down for most of that game. He had a very good opening drive, and then we really didn't see a lot of positives from the Hamilton offense really outside of that for a lot of that game against Saskatchewan. So 4 quarters of consistency is going to be needed. There's no doubt Mitchell's not been on point yet with his receiving core, and he's still trying to gain that chemistry. I think, too, last week, Lawler and him, there was a little bit better chemistry, but it came at the expense of some of the other receivers. I know Kenny Lawler's hell of a receiver. We're not splitting the atom, figuring that one out. But there are other great receivers on this team. If you're Bo Mitchell and if you're Scott Milanovich calling the plays, you can't forget that. Yeah, you want to feed Kenny Lawler as often as possible, but you have to remember there's a Shamar Bridges on this team who had a great season last year. There's Tim White, who people thought of entering a couple of years ago as a great number one receiver burgeoning in this league. You have Keandre Smith, who is a guy that really had a good season and a good finish last year. You can't forget about those guys. You've got to spread the wealth, share the wealth. And you got to get all your receivers involved. And I think at times last week, to the detriment of the Ticats offense, whether it was Scott calling the plays, whether it was Bo Levi Mitchell from his eyes, locking in on Lawler a bit too much, it's almost like he forgot to involve his other receivers. You got to have balance. You got to have diversity in the passing game. You can't just, feed it all to one receiver. And now another concern for Hamilton, too. The O-line's got to continue to improve. I don't think it's been great by any stretch of the imagination in the first 2 losses. They have no Greg Bell this week at running back. He's injured. Very interesting that they are not giving Johnny Augustine, who's already on the regular roster, they're not going to give him the starting spot. They're actually going to, and I thought they might go this route, and they are. They're going to actually bring Trayshawn Ward in from the practice squad and make him the starter. I think they like his a little more dynamic runner than Augustine. Augustine more of a power back. Ward has the potential to be more of a dynamic, explosive speed back for the Ticats. So that's obviously the option they've chosen here in this game. But I think that it's a good week to see if you can balance the offense a bit more, get the run game going here if you're the Ticats going into this game. Take some pressure off Bo Mitchell. No, there's no reason for Bo to have to throw it 35, 40 times a game. There should be some balance for the Ticats, but easier said than done, going up against this strong Montreal defensive front here in this game. I think at the current number, there's still great value for Montreal. I don't have utmost confidence in Hamilton being able to beat a team that's looked among the best teams in the CFL, nor should we when you look at series history. How about the Alouettes being 9-0 straight up, a 9-game win streak for this Montreal Alouettes team head-to-head over Hamilton? Hamilton's last win against Montreal was July 2022, almost 3 years ago. So it has been a lopsided series, 9-0 straight up, 8-1 against the spread for the Montreal Alouettes against Hamilton. And you look at the Moss versus Milanovic matchups last year, both double-digit wins for the Montreal Alouettes. Now, both of those games, Davis Alexander played for an injured Cody Fajardo, and he ripped us apart. I remember. It's like this, he just did whatever he wanted against that just horrific Ticats secondary, 33-16, 33-23 in those two wins for Montreal. That was with DA. This is not. This will be McLeod, Bethel, Thompson. But I still think at this point, with where this line is right now, I could only look at Montreal minus 130. Money line, Montreal team total, 26.5 over. They've scored 28 in all 3 games so far. Now, again, these are games started by Davis Alexander, and now they're going to MBT because of the injury to Davis. But I got to see more from Hamilton's defense before I'm ready to call them a great group. This is a Hamilton defense that's given up 38 and 28 points in their first 2 games. So the defensive improvement that we've been kind of like with Edmonton, we thought the defense would be better. I haven't seen it yet. Same thing with Hamilton. I thought the defense would be a little bit better. They shored up the secondary. They brought in Deshaun Amos from the Argos. I haven't seen it yet. That they've looked a lot better so far. So Montreal money line and team total over. I would not talk anyone out of that. I'm going to stick with those same 2 positions. Don't like it as much with DA out, obviously, at quarterback and MBT in instead. But yeah, there's nothing that could get me to trust Hamilton here. I'll hope they win from a fan standpoint. But yeah, Montreal's owned them. They're the better team, even with their QB2 starting. It wouldn't shock me if they go into Hamilton and beat the Ticats. And if they do, it would be the 10th straight win for the Montreal Alouettes over the Hamilton Tiger Cats. The totals come down, by the way, to 48.5. They are talking about chance of some thunderstorms in Hamilton tomorrow night. I've been down this road before. I can't tell you how many times they've called for rain for a Ticat home game, and then day of the game arrives and the forecast changes, and it's a beautiful sunny day or a clear night. So be careful with this forecast. It could change. But I'm sure that's playing a little bit into the under move. Plus of the fact that Davis Alexander's out, they probably think it's going to be more of a conservative offensive game plan from Montreal, which I wouldn't be surprised by. Run the football a bit more to help out MBT as well. So longer, more time-consuming drives possible in this game, especially for Montreal. So that probably plays a role too in the under money that we have seen for this game. All right, let's go to Saturday. BC and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan 2.5-point home favorites, 51.5 the total in this game. Huge move, obviously, toward BC. This opened 5.5 with Saskatchewan as home favorites. Now they're laying just 2.5, and it's all about the quarterback situations, really on both sides, because it's looking more and more like the number 1 quarterback for BC could return and play here in this game, and more likely that the number 1 quarterback for Saskatchewan won't play in this game. And that's part of the reason why we've seen this line move. The latest I've heard on Trevor Harris is I truly don't expect him to play. I don't think he's playing. I think he's out. He suffered a mild concussion last week in the win against Toronto, a game that they still won to go to 3-0. He did finish the game, but again, he's battling that. I heard there's maybe some kind of infection right now that Trevor Harris is dealing with as well. And you've got a 39-year-old quarterback who's not getting any younger, a 3-0 football team. So it's not like there's a huge sense of urgency to rush Trevor Harris out there to play this game when you're undefeated like the Riders are. And I think it's just a matter of when, not if, it becomes official that Trevor Harris is out. and he won't play in this game. And the betting markets have responded accordingly because with Trevor Harris out, you know what that means as far as who's going to start at quarterback for Saskatchewan. It would the worst, and it's not even close. He's in a league of his own in this category. The worst starting quarterback in the CFL last year, and it's not even close. And I'm talking about Jake Maier, who would get the start here for Saskatchewan, and I assume he will. Now, look, new team, new offense. Do you leave the door open now that in a backup role instead of a starting role, there's less pressure on him? He can thrive in this kind of situation. Of course, I've seen many quarterbacks thrive as a backup and struggle and just not be good, viable options as a starter. But I'm not there yet with Jake Maier. What I saw last year was just inaccuracy, far too much, overthrowing receivers, skipping balls into the turf, underthrowing receivers, bad decision-making, horrible at times decision-making. How many interceptions did he throw last year? Double digits. We saw how many pick sixes last year from Jake Maier. And we saw, and I happened to just watch one of Saskatchewan's preseason games, the second one when they played Winnipeg. Jake Maier got a couple of drives, and the first drive, he moved the ball to his credit, but a ridiculously bad decision in a red zone interception. And it's like, well, there he is. Same old Jake Maier. There's the Jake Maier I know and love. And it's that is why the betting markets, and including yours truly, responded the way I did. The moment it started to look like Trevor Harris' status for this game was in doubt. You can't be laying 5.5 with that guy as your starting quarterback. You just can't. He's an interception machine. He's a turnover machine. His arm strength just pales in comparison to some of the other quarterbacks in this league. And it's just a recipe, I think, for trouble. And it's not just all on Maier as to why I was not really ready to trust Saskatchewan. I definitely don't trust Saskatchewan as favorites with him at quarterback. But even when it was Trevor Harris, I mean, you look at these games and they escape by the skin of their teeth against Ottawa in week 1. They win that game by 5, and they have to hang on for dear life. The Hamilton game, same thing. Brett Lawther missed a bunch of kicks that night, and that probably kept Hamilton hanging around, but they only won that game by 5. They had a hard time putting Hamilton away, gaining separation. And then last week against Toronto, Mario Alford saved the day. It was a winnable game for the Argos. Saskatchewan kept letting Toronto back in it when they got a lead. That defense that, we expected to be pretty solid, they've shown some holes, especially in the secondary. The pass defense continues to be a bit of an issue for Saskatchewan, like it was at times last year. And they needed a Mario Alford rescue with the special teams blunder. Not enough people on the field on special teams for the Argos at the end to save the day and rescue them for a victory, 39-32. But they've been flirting with losing all 3 of those games, Saskatchewan. And that was with Trevor Harris starting the game. And now, so you're laying points with a team that has been having a hard time winning by big margins. And now you're going to put a much inferior quarterback in there. You can not totally understand why people were flocking left and right to bet BC earlier this week. The question is the value gone now? Down to 2.5 in this game. It could be gone, especially if Nathan Rourke doesn't play. But I do think Nathan Rourke's playing. I think he's trending to playing. He got more reps yesterday than he did the day before. A Faron of TSN seemed to think he was trending in the opposite direction. Now, they're using the phrase cautious optimism when it comes to Nathan Rourke playing on Saturday, but I do expect him to be in there. I think he's got a good chance to return. I think the fact that the returns were so underwhelming for Jeremiah Masoli last week, and the offense bogged down and there were turnovers involved, a little more urgency maybe to get Nathan Rourke to be back on the field, especially with 2 straight losses as well for BC. With the back-to-back losses to Winnipeg after opening the season with a home win against Edmonton. So I think he's going to play. Put it this way, even if it's Masoli versus Maier in this game, and that's your quarterback matchup, I'd still lean BC at this number. I really would. Because even though he had a couple interceptions, Masoli did move the ball, and he did throw almost 300 passing yards last week against Winnipeg. So it wasn't all bad. And he is certainly a veteran quarterback, and Saskatchewan's defense, certainly secondary from that perspective, probably not as good at the moment as Winnipeg. So if it's Masoli versus Mayer, I'd still probably lean BC. There's no way I'm laying points with Jake Mayer quarterback team. A Jake Mayer quarterbacked team is not one I'm laying points with as a favorite, period. Full stop. That's it. Nothing else to say. So it's still BC by default, but my anticipation was when I bet BC early in the week that Nathan Rourke's going to play. It's still BC or pass for me. Here's what you can bet. And even if Masoli plays, not Rourke, I think I could still sign off on this and say I think it's a good bet still. There's still 22.5 with this team total for BC sitting out there, 23.5 in some spots. Shop around, see if you can find the 22.5 because that's what I bet it at. But BC team total over 22.5, even though the line has gone from 5.5 down to 2.5 on BC, the team total hasn't moved that much. You're still seeing it around that 22.5, 23.5 range. Saskatchewan, despite their 3-0 start, they have given up 23 points or more in all three games. And obviously 23 or more cashes you a ticket here if you bet BC team total over 22.5. I think they can get to that 23-point mark. Certainly really like it. Really, really like it if Nathan Rourke plays here in this game. But even if it is Masoli, I think there's for a Riders team that has had some warts on defense where it's kind of been the offense. And again, the kick return game from Alford last week, that's been the catalyst for them winning these games. Harris has been really good. They are going to miss that with him likely not playing. He has been really dialed in pretty well. But the defense has had some cracks in it that if it's Rourke, I think they can easily get to 23 points here on Saturday night. But even if it's Jeremiah Masoli, I think they could still hit that 23-point mark here in this game. So I think if you didn't get the good number on BC, you could still take it at 2.5, but you're playing with a little bit more fire there. 3 point worse of the number, 3 points worse of the number with BC, but team total still has value to me. And that's probably the way I would go here. BC team total right now at the current numbers, 22.5, 23.5 in some other spots as well. But I think BC can go over that number there. Still lean BC, though. Like I said, I'm just not laying points with Jake Mayer at quarterback. That's just not going to happen because I don't trust the guy. And he's got to show me he's in a better situation right now and ready to play better before I'm ready to back him, because there's very little, if any, evidence from his time in Calgary that tells me he's ready to be a functional starting quarterback in the Canadian Football League. All right, let's go to Sunday, the finale for Week 4. Toronto Argonauts, Ottawa Red Blacks, Ottawa 2.5 point home favorites, 52.5 the total in this game. A winless Toronto Argonauts team. Lot of issues with Toronto, I must admit. Injuries galore on the really both sides of the football. But obviously last week we saw that defense get ripped apart by the Saskatchewan Roughriders and by Trevor Harris. And the defense is really, first of all, we mentioned this on the preview show, that the Toronto defense lost a lot on the defensive line, lost a lot in the secondary in the offseason. And then you add on top of that, the injury to Wynton McManus, who's the captain, the leader of the defense. And you just knew that defense when you saw that, man, they're in a world of hurt right now for this team. And that's still a concern. That's a big concern that I've got for them even this week. And you look at that injury report. McManus hasn't practiced. He's probably missing another game. Derek Parrish, an ankle injury on the D-line last week in the loss to Saskatchewan, did not practice. That's concerning. Kenneth George Jr., in the secondary, he had a serious injury last week to his knee. He's not practicing. Doubt we'll see him this Sunday night for the Argos. Now, there is some good news. Tavares Daniels looks like he's going to be good to go at receiver. They could get their dynamic kick returner, Janarian Grant, back. He has been practicing, albeit in a limited capacity. And Chad Kelly has returned to the practice field, but in a limited capacity. I'm not sold that means I think they're going to need to want to give him some time on the practice field before they just throw him in there and start. So I'm acting like Nick Arbuckle will once again start at quarterback Sunday night here for the Toronto Argonauts. Now, Toronto's winless, 0-3 straight up, 0-3 against the spread. And I faded the Argos in 2 of those games. I took the Alouettes against them I stayed off Toronto, or fading Toronto against Calgary, and they still lost. And I was on Saskatchewan last week against Toronto. So in the 3 straight up and ATS losses, I successfully bet against Toronto in 2 of those games. This is the week I'm on them, actually. And look, there's a lot of injury concerns. I read off that injury report. There's still a lot of concerns. Deontay McMahon at running back. There's another. The O-line hasn't played as well as I thought they would so far this season. But when you look at the Argos so far, they have played 2 undefeated teams in their first 3 games. 3-0 Montreal, 3-0 Saskatchewan, pretty tough opponents. And Nick Arbuckle's progressing. He's starting to get a little bit better. He had a bad game against an excellent Montreal defense on the road in week 1. He played a little bit better against Calgary, and I thought he played a lot better against Saskatchewan. What hurt Toronto and killed them in that game was not Nick Arbuckle. He moved the ball. He put up points for this Argos offense. What killed the Argos was the defense. Couldn't stop Harris and the Riders' offense. Special teams disasters, especially at the end. And, of course, all the penalties. The penalties, man, were just ridiculous from the Toronto Argos last week. That's the single biggest factor in why they didn't beat Saskatchewan last week. That was a winnable football game for the Toronto Argos last week. But you cannot, under any circumstances, commit the kind of penalties they did last week. And it's the kind of penalties that set Ryan Dinwiddie off. If you didn't watch it, do a YouTube search on Ryan Dinwiddie in the press conference after the loss to Saskatchewan last week. He was pissed. He was livid at the penalties. He called them selfish penalties. We're going to have to start cutting guys around here. I'm not putting up with it any longer. By verbatim is what he said after that game. And I don't blame him for being angry. It was ridiculous. The undisciplined penalties, the 15-yard variety, flapping their gums, pushing someone, hitting someone after the play ended. Those were the kind of dumb penalties the Argos were taking over and over again last week against Saskatchewan. And it killed them. From a field position standpoint, it killed them. And it's just, you can't be making those kind of mistakes. They ended up paying the price for them in that loss to Saskatchewan. But there were positives. Think about how shorthanded and depleted they were last week. And that's a big reason why I was on Saskatchewan, was just because of the injury report for the Argos. And to be honest, the injury report's not all that much better at the moment for the Argos going into this game on Sunday. But I still saw a pretty solid performance outside of the lack of discipline. Nick Arbuckle, like I said, was better. 26 of 33. That's a pretty damn good completion rate. 259 through the air, 2 touchdowns. He did have the 1 interception. They did get, finally, at least a little bit of a ground game going with Mayan Williams as the lead back. Dejon Brissett, Coxie, Kevin Mattel really stepped up with a nice game in the receiving core for the Argos last week, albeit the loss. But what ended up hurting the Argos, 11 penalties for 129 yards. And that's just not going to get it done. Too many. Way too many penalties, unselfish penalties, and a winnable game turned into a loss with some of those penalties. And, of course, the special teams blunder by the Argos at the end of the game. But I saw, for as depleted as they were, ravaged, in fact, various position groups, especially on defense, without Winton McManus. For them to be as shorthanded and depleted as they were, and to still have a chance to beat a very good Saskatchewan team last week before the Alford kick return touchdown sealed the deal, I think it's a step in the right direction. Now they're taking a step down, in my opinion, facing Ottawa compared to Saskatchewan. And yes, they won last week, their first win of the season, Ottawa to go to 1-2, but that was, you can't do much about evaluating that game. It was played in a rainstorm, heavy wind as well. How can we fairly evaluate Dustin Crum? I need to see more. Yes, he was better than expected, but he didn't have to throw the ball much because the conditions, you couldn't throw the ball very much in those conditions. So it played into the way the offense was. They want to run the offense with Dustin Crum, RPO heavy, quarterback run heavy, running game heavy. And to be honest, Calgary didn't do as good a job stopping the run as other teams had. William Stanback and Daniel Adeboboye had a very good game for Ottawa running the football last week. So now Toronto here, again, we'll see that their defense is still very vulnerable. But the one thing I think about the Argos, when you look at last week against Saskatchewan, overall, all things considered. Now, Saskatchewan did run the football with pretty good success. Maybe Ottawa can as well. But the secondary is just as concerning or for me with Toronto. And I think they're going to be smart enough to know, like, you make Dustin Crum beat you with his arm. And you try to take away Stanback and Adeboboye, and you contain Dustin Crum in the pocket, and you force him to beat you with his arm. That's the modus operandi for the Argos if they're going to try to win this game here against the Ottawa Red Blacks. I know this is playoff revenge. You know you're going to hear that from some people because Ottawa lost in the East semifinal last year, 58-38 to the Toronto Argonauts. I understand that. But Toronto's owned this series. They're 7-2 straight up, 7-2 against the spread the last 9 meetings head-to-head for the Argos over the Red Blacks. You're now getting them. You're even getting a +3, at a couple of books, including Bookmaker right now. I mentioned it earlier. I can't lay points with quarterbacks I don't really like or trust. That's what I said about Jake Mayer with Saskatchewan. That's what I say about Dustin Crum. It's one thing to take Dustin Crum as a small dog last week against Calgary in bad conditions where the passing game really is taken out of the equation because of the weather. It's a different animal laying points with a quarterback like this who I don't trust just yet. Okay, he won last week. Let me see him do it again. And let me see him do it when he's going to have to throw the football a handful of times, unlike last week. That's where I'm at. I think it's a good spot. You're getting an undervalued price now on the Argos. It's a buy low situation. I know they haven't looked good. They're winless. But Ottawa does not hold up to me with Saskatchewan. They're not as good as Montreal. And those were 2 of Toronto's first 3 opponents. And Arbuckle's getting better. He was better in the Calgary game than he was in the Montreal game. And he was better last week in the Saskatchewan game than he was in the Calgary game. He's getting better. He's getting incrementally better every week. And I still think this is an Ottawa defense that it was better last week, but this is also an Ottawa defense that before that gave up 31 in a loss to Saskatchewan and 39 in a loss to Montreal. Like, let's not go overboard that Ottawa's defense got it going last week. No, the weather got it going for that Ottawa defense more than anything. I think it was just a poor weather for offensive success in that game. So I'm not sold on laying points with Crum. I'm not sold on laying points with his Ottawa defense just yet. So I like the Argos here, 2.5, 3 in this game. The total, look, Toronto, 39-32 last week. Ottawa has been a big over team going back to last year. This has been a crazy over series. 7 straight head-to-heads with Argos versus Red Blacks have gone over the total. So it's difficult for me to go against that. I probably will have a small overplay in this game. Over bet at 52, it looks like, is the best number out there right now. But I like Toronto here as a small dog. I think this is the right time to buy in. And I think that Ryan Dinwiddie tirade about all the penalties and the selfish play and the mistakes and the lack of discipline, I'm hoping it lights a fire under this Argos team's ass for this game here on Sunday. And we'll see if it has any effect. Again, I am concerned about the injury report still for the Argos. It's still a laundry list of guys that may or may not play in this game. But I still think Toronto is a good situational side here in this game. Stepping down in class, desperation. They did get better. Again, they could have beat Saskatchewan last week. They could have. But mistakes hurt them in the end in what was a very winnable game. There's a couple other things I wanted to mention. First of all, I have to bring up Mark Killam. I can't tell you how much of a horrible game he coached last week, and it really has me concerned about him as a viable head coach in this league. He made some ridiculous mistakes last week. He goes for an onside short kick early in the game, doesn't get it, pays the price. I think it was too soon to go for it. And then later in the game, when he gets closer but there's less time on the clock, he doesn't go for an onside kick and kicks it deep instead. Again, poor decision-making. He screwed up the math where he didn't go for two to turn it into a two-possession game when he had the chance to. And sure enough, Edmonton roars back and it actually gets it to within single digits again, where if they had gone for two the first time, they would have been able to go for two when they scored that fourth quarter touchdown and get the margin back to 8 points. And it would have been a one-score game. And the funny part is there was a time there that they got the ball back, and if they had gone for two the earlier touchdown, and gone for two and gotten it the second time, they would have had the ball and down by one score, down by 8 points. But he screwed up the math. He didn't go for two when he clearly should have. And, a fucking elementary school student can figure out that you should have gone for two there from a math standpoint. And Mark Killam and his coaching staff couldn't figure it out. So it was an absolutely brutal night for him. It was ridiculous. And then he punts. Like, talk about, you're going to lose the game anyway. Why are you not going for it on that third down with, a minute and change left? Instead he punts. He gives up on the game. Now, they were down by 2 scores at the time. I get it. But, why are you just giving up on the game like that? It didn't make sense. I know for Edmonton backers, they weren't too thrilled with that decision last week. But, yeah, very bad signs from a how to manage the game and coaching decisions perspective from Mark Killam last week. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, now I've forgotten it, but there was something else I wanted to mention last week. I'll be damned if I remember it, but that's the main one. I wanted to throw something out there about Mark Killam. That was not good. That was not pretty. What I saw from him last week. And I'll be honest, Buck Pierce has disappointed me a little bit. Not to the extent of Mark Killam, and I still love the way he's operated all these years as an offensive coordinator. But like I said, there's room for improvement for both of the guys getting their first look as a CFL head coach this year. More so for Killam. What Killam did was a disaster. He was a disaster last week, Mark Killam. There's no justification for any of the shit he did last week. None. Zero in that game against Montreal. But unfortunately, yeah, it was a rough look for him there in that game. All right, let's wrap up the show and get to a best bet here for CFL Week 4. The numbers moved significantly toward the BC Lions, but the team total is still at a very playable price and playable number, in my opinion. And that's what we'll go with for best bet here for CFL Week 4 on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Let's go with the BC Lions team total over 22.5. And you can find that at Bet99, minus 125, the best price, best number. Actually, Fanatics still has BC team total over 22.5, minus 115 right now. So I like that. I love it if Nathan Rourke plays, and I think he is going to be the guy starting. I think he will play. But even if it's Masoli, I still think they can hit 23 points. Remember, Saskatchewan's defense has had some holes in it. They haven't been a shutdown D by any stretch of the imagination. You've been able to throw on them, and they've given up at least 23 points in every game so far, despite their 3-0 start. And like I said, 23 points from the BC Lions here on Saturday will cash this ticket. So BC Lions team total over 22.5, minus 115. We'll go with that for best bet for Week 4 in the CFL here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Shout out to everyone for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like button on the way out. Appreciate it very much. And that's a wrap for this edition of the show. Appreciate all the support. As always, I'm Ian Cameron. Have a great week. Enjoy CFL Week 4, and good luck. And we will be back with you next week for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.